All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on the I Want Solar panel discussion. And hopefully we can get through some really good insights and experiences from our wonderful panel this afternoon, and also be able to answer any of your questions that you've got for us. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri Wurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and pay my respect also to any First Nations in the audience. My name is Stephanie Bashir. I'll be chairing the session this afternoon, and I'm the CEO of Nexa Advisory. I've been in the energy space for over 20 years with experience in renewables, and hopefully we can have an exciting and interactive session, especially after lunch. So I guess before I start introducing our first panelist, we are talking about solar rooftop and accelerating the uptake of distributed energy resources, which is solar, batteries, electric vehicles, and things in the home in Australia could help Australia meet its renewable energy and emissions reduction targets. And that is really around circumventing, the need for the large scale as we build that big stuff. Australia is also a world leader in rooftop solar. So Australians are known to have a love affair with rooftop solar. And we have the world-beating skills and resources in actually installing rooftop solar per capita globally. So with that, I think I'll introduce our first speaker on the panel. John Grimes, who is the CEO of the Smart Energy Council. He is a vocal advocate for the whole smart energy industry, very passionate about solar generation and storage, and his influence basically reaches across all parts of government, federal, state, local, across the broad spectrum of issues on solar PV, batteries, and the decarbonisation of our energy industry. With that, please join me in welcoming John.
Stephanie, I think we'll speak from here, right? So can everybody hear me okay at the back? You can hear me? That's great. Just shout it if you can't. So, okay, so this is very, very practical ideas. How do you start on the journey to install solar at your house? That's really what we're talking about today. So let's start. The number one thing you want to do is get a feel for how much electricity you currently use. Now you can do this by looking at your electricity bill. It'll show you your average use over the last quarter. And it's worth looking back over a couple of different bills because they will represent different seasons in time. Here in Victoria, it gets pretty cold in winter time, so you're probably cranking up the heating, right? Or you might be in the solar season, which is right now, where we've got beautiful sunshine, and it's very mild, so you're not really running the heating, you're not really running the air conditioner, so your power bill in this season is actually quite low. So worth looking over time. If you're a single person living on your own, you might be using 15 kilowatt hours a day. Or you might be someone like me that has 3 adult children at home that will not leave, and we're using something closer to 40 kilowatt hours a day, which is quite a lot. So get it first, that's the starting point. Understand what your energy needs are. The second thing you should then think about is getting a solar system to meet your needs. Now, the first thing to talk about is cost. Now, the good news here is solar is unbelievably cheap. Let me put that into context. You're here, you'll be paying for electricity from the grid, you're probably paying 25, 35 cents per kilowatt hour, right? Different retailers, different amounts of money. Well, when you buy a solar system, you're actually buying 25 years of energy capacity up front. Because once you've got the solar system, the fuel that runs your solar system is sunshine, and it's completely free of charge. So you're buying all of that energy up front. Now, if you amortise the cost of that solar system, including the cost of financing it, if you actually need to pay an interest rate for that, and you amortise that over the 20-year period, the effective rate of energy that is being produced from your solar system is not 35 or 25 or even 20 cents per kilowatt hour. It's around 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So we're not talking about a little saving. We're not talking about shaving 20% off the energy cost. We're talking a massive reduction in cost if you get it right. So the second thing is you're thinking in the right way. Really, this is a great, great investment. Third, when you've got your solar, use it when the sun is shining. Because if it's dark outside, you're not producing solar and you will be buying electricity from the grid. So shift your energy use to the daytime. Run your dishwasher, your clothes washing machine. If it's hot, pre-cool your house with cooling, right? Electric cooling. If it's cold, pre-warm your house with electric heating. So when you actually are using electricity from the grid, you've got to use it less because you've already got it to a nice comfortable temperature. The unit's not working so hard to actually cover that load. So, time of use. The next thing to think about is how big your solar system should be. So we started with the amount of energy you use. Here's the rule of thumb. 1 kilowatt of solar capacity will produce in Melbourne around 4 kilowatt hours of electricity a day. So if your use is 20 kilowatt hours a day, then a 5 kilowatt solar system will produce roughly 20 kilowatt hours a day. Now, it gets a little bit complex because in wintertime it's going to produce about 40% less because it's cloudy and overcast, there's not much sun. And then in summertime it's going to produce a bit more. So think about doing the calculation, that'll get you into the ballpark, and then add a bit, right? Because solar's really cheap, right? Paybacks of 4.5, 5 years on your solar system, sometimes even less, even quicker. So do that calculation. So 1 kilowatt of capacity equals about 4 kilowatt hours of generation per day as a rule of thumb. You might be worried about shading. This is where you've got big trees. This is a leafy area, right? An established area, and shading is something to consider. But modern inverters handle shading really well. In the olden days, you got a little bit of shading on your solar array and you could write the whole thing off. You didn't get much production. That's not the case anymore. Today's modern inverters are very smart and they will allow you to keep generating. You won't be generating to the full capacity, but just because you've got shading, don't rule solar out. Something that might rule solar out is a slate roof though. Many installers are worried about slate roofs, so you need to think about that. The final thing, I don't want to monopolise time, and that is choose your supplier well. And the thing that I recommend to family and friends is look for somebody who's been in the business for some time. Somebody who's local, been in the business for at least 5 years, they're not a startup, they understand, they're going to be there if there's a problem with your system. Finally, think about this, cut the gas, right? Move your gas load to electric load and get a bigger solar system. Think about this, move your petrol bill to an electric vehicle and get a bigger solar system. So that way you're going to get rid of not just your electricity bill, but your gas bill and your petrol bill too. It's a no-brainer.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Our next speaker is Rick Brazzali. Rick is the Managing Director of Green Energy Markets, also with over 30 years experience in the renewable energy industry and has guided a lot of the solar and energy efficiency policies. So please join me in welcoming Rick. Thank you, Rick.
Oh, thanks, Stephanie. I thought what I might do to contribute to the discussion is to maybe look a little bit further into the future. Amongst some of the other projects we work on is we put together battery and solar power projections for the market operator, and that gets us thinking about what might happen over time. So when you're looking at the attractiveness or otherwise of a solar system, there's a number of things that you'll need to consider and potentially factor into your calculations. And I'm going to go through a couple of those now. First one is look at what government incentives are available. And if you're in Victoria, you've also got access to the Solar Homes program through Solar Victoria, and there's potentially $1,400 of support available through the Victorian government, as well as a 4-year zero interest loan. So that certainly helps bring your payback down. There's also, under the federal government scheme, sort of small technology certificates, or STCs. They will contribute, depending on the size of the system, more than $2,000, $2,000 to $3,000 of the cost of the system. Typically, your solar retailer will already include that and capture that benefit and pass it on to you as a lower capital cost. So these are things that will impact on the sort of the upfront cost of the system. The other thing you need to worry about or consider is what's called a feed-in tariff, which is the amount you get paid for the electricity you export to the grid. And it does depend on your circumstances and the size of the system, but we find these days there's a significant proportion of the output of a solar system is exported. So the rate you get is really important. The problem here is that the rate had been above 10 cents a kilowatt hour a couple of years ago. It was just over 5 cents a kilowatt hour last year. This financial year is down to 4.9, and we see that continuing to fall. And you might say, why is that? And the reason for that is that the more and more solar we get, the more and more generation in the middle of the day, and prices in the middle of the day are going to keep getting lower and lower and lower. Just if you're a solar generator in Victoria in the month of September, you would have had to pay to generate. And the average price that solar generators, large-scale solar generators got was, I think was minus $4 a megawatt hour. Because, as John said, in September, sunshine's great, consumption's low, that means the wholesale price of electricity is really low. And so over time, that's going to get worse because we're going to get more and more solar generation. But the solution there is batteries. And now we're seeing a lot more interest in batteries. In this last year, across the country, we had about a 50-60% increase in the amount of residential batteries installed. Very expensive still, but costs are coming down. Batteries. So we think that over time it'll become much cheaper, more cost effective, or your payback's going to be better buying a solar PV system with batteries. Not yet, and I think it's still really attractive, but the support through the federal government's small scale technology scheme is going to phase out by 2030, and so we think within the next 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, it'll be really much more compelling to, if you're going to buy PV, buy a battery as well. I might leave it there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Rick. And we've also got Nancy Huang. Nancy is a local resident here in Boroondara, and she has gone through the experience of installing her own solar and also electrification. So she's really walked the path and the journey, and she will be great in sharing some of those experiences with us this afternoon. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Is that all right? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm completely the non-expert, so I'll just talk about my experience. I'll break up my experience in the journey into 5 areas. Firstly, I'll talk about the why. Secondly, I'll talk about the how. How did we start? Thirdly, I'll talk about how we actually then made the final decision about the panels. And then what has flowed from it since we've installed it about 12 months ago. And then finally, I'll finish up with some lessons learned. I think it's really important to talk about why, because although we've been thinking about it for at least 5 years, we didn't really get serious about it until about 2 years ago. And that speaks very much to the previous session I was in when Sol talked about this anxiety, this climate anxiety. So I really started to think about what can I do around carbon footprint, and a lot was really facilitated by meeting a lot of the volunteers on some of the election campaigns that I participated in. And I met a lot of people who really gave me a lot of encouragement. At the moment, we're very lucky because we moved into a house where they already had 3-phase power, but there was gas stove, there was a gas fireplace, there's also a gas instantaneous hot water. However, we already had double glazing and we had a flat roof. So it really was sort of a situation where we thought it's about time we started to think about exactly what we can do. The second factor around the why is the cost of living. I mean, really, as the last sort of 2 years have evolved, our cost of living has increased, and we were entering a transition into the next phase of our life in our 6th decade. So a plan for an EV was on the cards, and we wanted to think about how we can start to reduce that sort of out-of-pocket cost every month. And the third is really the timing. The stability of housing and some access to information was really vital in our decision to actually take the next step. Just take a drink. So the second aspect is how did we make a start? So research, research and research. If I had an expo like this 2 years ago, it would have been very, very helpful. And some of the tips that John already gave. But we started off a lot with our social networks. We really talked to family and friends and people who've had solar batteries. And then there's actually quite a lot of free public resources available. We went to the Q Library. Quite a lot of magazines now are focused around renewables, such as Renew, a magazine we found. Boroondara Council actually ran quite a few sustainability events over the last 2 years. Australian Energy Foundation. We also booked a couple of one-on-one consultations with Yarra Energy Foundation, where we could sort of talk to them about our context. And then there were online, there were chat rooms and there were private websites. How do we make the final decision? We really, as John had said, calculated our requirements at about 15 kilowatt hours per day, and we proceeded to get 3 quotes. But we wanted to make sure that the 3 quotes were from quite different suppliers, long-standing, but also ones that people have used, ones that were recommended. So we got 3 quotes, and they amazingly were so vastly different, giving them the same requirements around our energy use. You know, we went from 65,000 to 9,000. So that was the variation of the quotes that we were given, of the 3. And then we also had to really think through what future-proofing meant for us and our requirements, and also the requirements for rewiring, replumbing, and a whole lot of internal stuff that we had to do, as well as the solar panels themselves. So the final decision we made was based on the cost, obviously, the reputation, our budget, and also the hardware requirements that we were going for. And when we did the research, we didn't go for the lowest, we didn't go for the highest, we went mid-range that suited our budget. And what has flowed from it? Well, we got all sorts of wild predictions about what we were doing to the environment in going solar, but I think the estimate that's pretty accurate is that we've probably saved over 6,000 kilograms of coals that we didn't burn from using the solar from a year. And because we moved to an EV also 6 months ago, we've probably saved 900 litres of petrol, as John said before. We've also converted to a stovetop, an induction stovetop, and we're using our appliances very, very differently. We've had a lot more conversations with family and friends when they found out that we've sort of gone solar, and calculating, so I've gone through our 12 months of energy bills, and I think this is the headline that everyone's waiting for. How much money did we actually save? Well, I've calculated it. It's about $100 a month less in energy cost, but about $300 less in petrol cost. So in fact, it was the petrol that actually is the sort of more cost saving. And we're on a continual journey because we haven't finished. We haven't converted our hot water. We haven't actually sort of got our battery yet. So there are still a few things that we need to consider through it. So what are the lessons that we've learned? Well, firstly, I think it's really important not to rush. I mean, I know we've had some domestic disagreements at home because I wanted to go quickly, my husband wanted to go slow, slow, slow. So in the end, we took 12 months to make the decision, and I would have to say, please don't rush. It actually is worthwhile going to get different dimensions of the information, different quotes and different calculations of your energy requirements. The second lesson is don't give up, because it was overwhelming. It was really overwhelming, and it started to get more and more complicated. It was also like I had to learn a different language, you know, amps and kilowatt hours and you know, all sorts of different terms that came, and it's easy to get bamboozled. So really take your time, do it slowly, and really understand what your own requirements are. I would say future-proofing, thinking about what you really want to do in 5, 10 years' time, and put something in that you can afford. That's probably the best that you can afford at the time, so you can think about future-proofing that. And the last lesson that we learned is, I think as you discussed briefly, Rick, you have to be vigilant around your energy supplier, because every month they change the feed-in tariffs, the timing, the period, the cost of energy, and it was just so confusing. So we've really found we had to completely change our providers twice now, just so we can get the sort of savings that we predicted. And you know, the other thing is, whatever calculations you're given, take it with a grain of salt, because you always get less than what they tell you you're going to get, and you probably need to build up what you require by about 20%. That's our experience.
Thank you, Nancy. There's nothing better than a real-life experience and the lessons learned from that. Thank you. Before we open up the floor, because I really want this session to be quite interactive and be able to answer your questions while we've got the experience on stage here. I thought I might just open it up with the first question around obviously we heard each of you touch a little bit on the benefits of solar, but it might be just worthwhile going a little bit deeper into how solar rooftop can help save money and reduce emissions, and what are some of the things that we need. So what are the other benefits and integrations needed to really fully get the benefits from solar rooftop? We'll start with you, John.
Thank you, Stephanie.
You're smiling.
Yeah, that's right, smiling. Well, you know, first thing to consider, when you put solar on your rooftop, you're actually cutting out a whole lot of cost and complexity in the process. The way energy is produced in Australia is we build a coal-fired power station next to a coal mine, hundreds of kilometres away, and then we have these big transmission lines that bring it into the cities. Then we go through a distribution network, which are kind of the local poles and wires in your local neighbourhood. And then we have a retailer who sells you the energy, but they also factor in a marketing cost so that they can tell you how good they are so that you don't change energy provider, a cost that you bear, right? So all of those costs, even if the energy coming in at the beginning of the process was free, it would be more expensive than what you produce on your roof right above you. So don't just think about the local benefit, right? There's a benefit right through the chain, right? But to your broader question, what I'd love to see is peer-to-peer trading of energy, where the local preschool had a big system on their roof, and when it was the weekend and none of the kids were in the facility, they could sell you the electricity at a cheap price. And when they had extra kids in there, you could send them your excess electricity. You could actually share with your neighbour. So the ability to actually capture energy and use it in a much more intelligent way is something that really excites me. Technically, it's possible, The rules don't allow it. And so that's about political change. That's about reimagining an energy network that works for people, not for power companies. That's what I'd like to see.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great.
I suppose taking a little bit different slant, I think sort of the urgency to take climate actions means we've got to close coal plant much faster than they're currently slated, and it's really disappointing. It really pisses me off to see both the Victorian and New South Wales government actually paying coal-fired power stations to stay on. But part of the rationale for that is the politicians are still concerned that we can't build out large-scale renewable and transmission fast enough, and so therefore, in the short term, we're keeping these coal plants open, when one of the best solutions is to help households not just put in PV, but PV plus residential storage. So my message is really battery storage is a sort of a long-term thing we'll need to be able to get a fully 100% renewable grid. And we can start doing it at the residential level and business level, and that will drive much greater benefits. So for me, it's sort of the future is going to be more about storage, and we are seeing costs start to come down, particularly as a whole lot of most auto manufacturers now are going to nearly strong EV platforms, and so that's happening fast, and I think we could easily get in front of the curve in Australia if we had some progressive policies to support residential batteries.
And so maybe I'll just ask a quick follow-up question on that is, we heard in the previous session, some of the policies that could be implemented, and one of them was, like we have subsidies for solar rooftop, shifting that into the subsidies for batteries as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I'll go first since we wrote about this a couple of years ago. No, that's what we'd recommend. We think that's a really good idea to sort of create greater incentives for people to install solar and batteries because then that's providing a longer term solution so we can phase coal out faster. And it's really that simple for me.
There's a great opportunity to time shift, to take production when it's sunny at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and people are at work or at school, and to shift that energy and use it at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. That's just a no-brainer. We've produced that energy, it's zero emissions energy, it makes perfect sense to time shift that energy into the night time. Now the benefit would be huge because you'd just get the benefit of solar not just in the daytime but at night time as well. And the other benefit is the whole community because delivering that energy at 8 o'clock at night is really expensive. It's one of the reasons why your power bills are so high, because we have to build for that peak, right? Even though it doesn't happen very often, we have to build for the peak. Now, the great news is, look at South Australia. South Australia, at times now, particularly this time of the year, is actually powered, short periods of time, nevertheless, powered 100% by rooftop solar alone. Just rooftop solar, not the big wind farms or the big solar, right? It's just on people's rooftops, right? We as a community have an enormous capacity to solve this problem. Now, the good news is batteries are coming down in price. So they're at sort of $1,000 per kilowatt hour, then they went to $500 per kilowatt hour, then they were sitting for a long time at about $250 and then $200. We're seeing today in electric vehicles, batteries being produced at $100 per kilowatt hour. That's a phenomenal cost. The good news is there's lots of battery capacity around the world, which means there's extra batteries being produced, so there is downward pricing. We haven't seen that in stationary energy yet, but it's only a matter of time. So we're on the cusp of having actually quite affordable battery technology, and governments should be, because we're getting into all of these planning problems with these big developments. Households can help solve this problem. Business, small business, medium-sized business can help solve this problem. Get the incentives right, make the economics get to the point where it makes sense. What a great outcome. Helps your family budget, helps the local community and job creation, helps slash our emissions for the future. Politically, it's a winner, right? So why wouldn't you do it? And we should be demanding our politicians that this is the next step. This is what we need to do to solve the climate crisis.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. Have we got any questions? Right. Thank you.
Hi, my question is, are there different sorts of batteries, different technologies, and if there are, how do you decide which one you're going to put in your own home?
There are, and I think the one everyone talks about is the lithium-ion batteries, is the one that's typically in your car, and I think generally that's the biggest market sector at the moment is lithium-ion, and that's perfectly fine. I did read the other day that there's significant investment going into sort of more solid-state batteries, which has high power density. In other words, will be more efficient and more cost-effective, but that's still some years away. I don't know, John, if you...
Yeah, lithium iron phosphate in particular, because it's probably the safest of the lithium-ion, chemistries. And then the other one is sodium-ion. So actually using salt batteries, sodium-ion batteries, really exciting because sodium very abundant and very cheap. And so the big battery makers are investing a lot of R&D in this. I think this is the next phase, but probably still 3-5 years away. My message would be don't wait, but you might size your battery to a reasonably small battery today, right? Just to do that time shifting internally. In the future, we want to put some pressure on the car manufacturers to actually give us the capacity to use our electric vehicles as batteries on wheels, right? Charge them up in the daytime, plug them into your household load during the night time. That's possible, but all these things are emerging. But again, consumer pressure will help bring them about.
Thank you. We have a question in the back.
Hi. Can I buy a system that is made here in Australia and so backup parts if needed and everything? I can rely that they will be supplied. It might be a bit more in cost, but at a reasonable cost.
The quick answer is yes, you can. There is a manufacturer at some scale, a company called Tindo Solar, manufactured at the old Holden automotive plant in Adelaide, or just near the automotive plant in Adelaide. So yes, there is. They still do rely on some components coming from overseas though, and one of the problems is that you need to have quite large economies of scale to get the manufacturing throughput, to get the products down the cost curve. And so one of the things the federal government is looking at is actually providing a subsidy scheme for manufacturers of solar panels and solar inverter technology, EV chargers, that type of thing. That would be really great in our view if we could attract that manufacturing and the value adding here to Australia. And in fact, the Smart Energy Council has called on the federal government to invest like the Americans have in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's sort of $1 trillion act to try and encourage that manufacturing locally. Well, we're calling on the Australian government to commit to $100 billion of support over the next 10 years, which actually isn't much. It's actually less than we provide as subsidies for diesel fuel in Australia today. But that type of investment would give us, it'd bridge the gap between what we can do and what we need to do to really get that manufacturing happening here in Australia.
Got a question here.
Yes, I have a question about owning an electric vehicle. Do you have your own EV charger? And if so, may I ask, how much that was, or whether you had to shop around a bit to find the best value EV charger, please?
Yes, we when we bought our EV, which was a Tesla, there's only one type of home Tesla charger, so we didn't have any choice, and so we had that installed. I think the EV charger on its own was just over $1,000, and to get that installed, yeah. So we didn't, when I calculated the savings and the payback, I haven't really thought about the payback for the EV, but what I've calculated is just compared the petrol cost to the saving cost per month. So what that $300 a month was just the saving for our petrol compared to our charging. From home charging, as I said, it varies during the day, and if we really now just charge during the day, which we've learnt to do. We've got some smart meters. Simonson Hill, I don't know whether, he helped us do some home automation and built in some meters where we can see how much solar is coming in, how much we're using, and when's the ideal time to charge. So most of the time, if we're charging during sort of those high sunlight hours, we're actually charging our car for free once we've put in the home charger.
Thank you.
I saw a hand. Oh, here we go. Thank you.
You were saying earlier that there are regulations currently prevent essentially local selling of electricity to each other, but there have been examples, I'm not sure whether they're in Australia or overseas, where local sharing of batteries has occurred, and I'm wondering what the Australian regulations are in relation to this. Given the high cost of batteries at the moment, that would be one way of sort of bridging the gap until the individual costs of home batteries come down. And I'd be interested to know what the situation is and how you see the future.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer that if that's okay
Yeah,
with
go
the
ahead.
panel. I guess there is quite a number of regulatory reviews going on at the moment, but in Australia there has been a few trials on peer-to-peer trading, which is local energy sharing. There is a lot overseas that is going on in that space. One of the key barriers here for us that we will need government leadership on is the change of the electricity distribution tariffs that goes basically and makes up quite a large proportion of our electricity bills. And that sort of reform does require all of us to champion, whether it's at the local, state or federal government. It is a conversation that's been going on for years and pretty much not going very far. But there are a number of trials in that space. Does anyone want to add anything to that?
The only thing I was going to add is our system was designed assuming that we had a whole lot of big coal-fired generators distant, and therefore the network, you actually can't deal with electricity outside your boundary. It's illegal, and so you can't drop a line to your next door neighbour, and you just can't. It's illegal. And so, our system's hasn't been designed that way, and so you need to do a fundamental rewrite. And the issue comes down to network charges. So the network business still want to recover the cost of the poles and wires, even though you're dropped a wire across the fence. And so, and if you did that, then there's not much benefit in doing peer-to-peer if all you're doing is sort of selling at the wholesale rate. You want to actually also get the benefit of producing and consuming power locally, which is the whole point of the exercise.
Do you think community batteries have a future?
Oh, we don't think community batteries add much value at all, other than to the local distribution businesses, but no, in short.
Yeah. We've got a question here in the front. Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. John, at the start you were talking about working out how much electricity you use in designing designing the PV system. But when you have a multiple energy source, like I do with gas as well, for heating, for example, is there a way of is there a rule of thumb for converting the kilojoules that you use from gas as the component of your total energy use to work out your kilowatts?
Gee, what an excellent question, a great question. The answer is actually when you go electric, you get massive energy savings. Let me give you one example. You might be using an instantaneous gas hot water system today, right, for your hot water. If you transition that across to an electric heat pump system, and there's a whole bunch of them out here in the exhibition hall, They actually use the energy in the air as a way of amplifying the energy input. So let me just unpack that for you. It means that you put 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in and you get about 4 kilowatt hour equivalent of hot water out. It's kind of like magic, right? by using the air temperature differential. Now, you can get that technology. So it means that your overall energy cost, if you go from gas to electric, is going to come down massively, whether you power it with renewables or not. But once you repower it with renewables, of course, that 1 kilowatt hour of energy going in is coming from solar energy. The same is true of heat pump heating and cooling systems. So air conditioning and heating systems, what they call the coefficiency, the COP potential of those is even better. 1 kilowatt hour of electricity in, 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 kilowatt hours of heating or cooling coming out the other end. So that's really good news. When you're doing gas cooking, that's not a huge amount, it's not a huge energy use. But again, if you go to an induction cooktop, then again, that's very, very energy efficient way of using energy. So overall, if you electrify, your energy cost is going to come down. But if you electrify and cut the gas, you're also going to get rid of the daily connection charge that you're being charged to be on the gas network. So it's kind of like a saving. So that's probably the best way I can answer that.
Yes. I'm thinking about the cost of heating from gas, and you still need to establish the size of your PV system. So is there a rule of thumb that converts and you do, I recognise you do get the COP savings, but you still need to actually have a figure of how much energy you use.
I was talking to one of our leading installers actually on Friday about this, and in practical terms, here's what people do. Solar is so cheap, cover your whole rooftop in solar. That's what people actually do. Put as much solar on as you possibly can, and then eke as much out of that as you possibly can. That I think is the best answer I can give.
Thank you. We'll take one more question right at the back there. Thank you.
When I was talking to one of the exhibitors today, I asked him, can I haven't got any solar power at the moment, but I'm thinking of putting it on a rooftop. And I was thinking of purchasing an electric vehicle later. So I asked them, can I power my electric vehicle directly from my rooftop solely? And I was surprised when they said, no, you can't do that. You're going to have to use off-peak electricity from the grid to do that. So that's something that astounded me. I thought it was something I could do.
I'm based in Canberra, so I've got a national view, and there are products that will help you that are basically solar switches, and they will detect when your solar panel is producing so much electricity, it will actually feed electricity to your electric vehicle. That technology absolutely exists. It exists for heat pump solar hot water systems as well. So completely feel relaxed on that perspective. Whether there's some sort of local rule, sometimes I know there's different tariffs that might apply, but I don't think so. You're not aware, Stephanie? No.
I think there's quite a lot of information out there, but there's no transparency on kind of, you really need to go to the distribution network and rely on them quite heavily to understand what is available for your particular area, unfortunately.
So the distributors, the fellow who spoke to me said that if he charges his car between 12 midnight and 3 a.m., he gets a lower fee to do that, and that's how he does it. So I guess that's the solution.
If you're on off-peak tariffs, potentially. But I think the point I would say, that's changing quickly. Overnight it's going to be peak, and middle of the day is going to be off-peak, just because we've got so much solar. So there's still a little bit of a hang-up, because I think there's typically off-peak had been the middle of the night when we needed to keep coal-fired generators going, and we encouraged, the electricity businesses encouraged people to put in off-peak hot water. That's now quickly changing. the middle of the day is the peak.
And we have actually just found a provider who actually charges different rates also for EV charging. So there's a EV sort of, if you have an EV charger that's installed, they have a different rate to, doesn't matter which time of the day, even off-peak or on-peak, EV charging and normal household use, there's a different rate of use, much cheaper for EV charging.
Yeah, and that goes back to the point that was made earlier, that you really need to shop around and keep, I think it was also made in the previous session around shopping around for your retailer to see what sort of deals are available for the various needs. But unfortunately, we are a little bit behind when it comes to tariffs and charging, and that whole two-way energy flow is still very early stages. I guess that ends our session. Before we close, I just want to thank Electrify Boroondara for organising such an amazing day and for inviting us also to share our experiences. Thank you all for joining us. And please join me in thanking the panel.